guys, welcome to our last episode of season 2, The Missed Appointment. Today we have Miss Amena Brown. She is an author, a spoken word poet, an event host, and a public speaker. She is joining us today to talk a little bit about her journey as a storyteller and her narrative as a female entrepreneur. Welcome to The Missed Appointment.
Thanks, Daisy. I'm excited to be here.
So in recent years, there's been a lot of conversation about being a girl boss. And the definition has expanded from just being a female who's starting her own business, right? Now it's all about like rolling up her sleeves as a woman and setting her own rules and paving her own way. What do you think of this narrative, and do you think you fit this narrative?
I think it's a great narrative. I think women have always been bosses. So I think it's good for us to remember that too, that those of us who are in the current generation of girl boss, you know, that we're really continuing on in this legacy of women that have been running the world a long time.
Yeah.
And that kind of helps me too, because I think being a woman who is running things in any area can sometimes, depending on what you're doing, feel lonely or feel like it's so much, it's so overwhelming. And I think it's helpful to remember that we're coming along after a long line of women that have been doing this, that we're sort of continuing the work, right? And I think that we're a part of what women are doing all over the world, you know, and that kind of helps me to go, okay, it could be overwhelming, but women all over the world are doing this, and we're doing this together. So I love that narrative.
So as a woman of color and coming from a very diverse background, how do you use your creative energy to make the world, you know, a better place?
I guess it's like I have things I'm doing that I hope have a greater impact. Okay. I think it can be hard sometimes to know if what you're doing with your business or, you know, with your organization or whatever it is where you lead, it can be hard to know if that's making a great impact, right? So I think for me, it's important to always in some way be connected to a community of women of color. And for me, obviously that's, you know, my mother and my grandmother and my sister, it's women in my family, it's women who are, you know, in similar neighborhood to me, it's women who are leading all over the world. So that's a part of the give back to me, is almost like this communal experience that we can have as women, where we can give to each other in some of those ways, give each other wisdom and experience. You know, I'm sure, Daisy Jane, you could say the same. I know I have a lot of women who are my friends, but they have a lot of expertise in areas that I don't know anything about, you know, so I can call them sometimes and go, hey, about this contract.
Yes,
you know, like,
please read it to me.
What are the things it should say, you know, whatever that is. So I think that's a part of it. I think for me, it's a big deal to try and find areas where I can give back to younger women and high school students and junior high students and young girls, particularly for young girls of color as well. I think really just, it's like I want to have this sort of symbiotic relationship, and I'm not always great at doing this, but the ideal to me is that I have women in my life who are older than me that give back to me, and that I have women in my life who are younger than me, and I give back to them. So to be able to have that kind of exchange, I hope that has this ripple effect in the world, that has a great impact.
Being your own boss can mean that, you know, you're setting your own rules, setting your own boundaries. When it comes to self-care practice, what kind of boundaries do you set for yourself to make sure that you are, you know, physically and mentally healthy?
I think it's really important that you brought up boundaries along with self-care, right? I feel like when I talk to a lot of women about self-care, it just becomes like bubble baths and massage and, you know, getting your nails done, which is also a part of self-care, right? But I think there are some other sort of intangibles, and I think having good boundaries is one of them. I almost want to say just learning to cancel things, like currently in my life, is a part of having good boundaries, in the sense of trying to, I guess I'll say it to you this way, like I am a driver type personality, right? So if I come up with 10 goals, I will work myself to the end of time to get those 10 goals completed, even if it's unrealistic to do that amount of goals in whatever amount of time I've given myself, which is typically like what I do. I'm gonna accomplish these major 10 things in an hour, you know, and like realizing, hey, girl, you can't do that in an hour. those 10 things might take you 2 years instead, right? So part of that for me is creating better boundaries around my work, around the ways that I even set goals for myself, like setting the goals more realistically, for example. That's one thing. Saying no to things, even if they're good things that just aren't maybe the best use of my time at the moment. Also trying to practice choosing myself when that's really hard for me. I would rather choose other people most of the time. I would rather inconvenience myself or make myself uncomfortable so that other people can be comfortable. And you should have some times in life like that, because life is not all about your comfort and your convenience, but also you love yourself and you care enough about yourself to say, I need to get some rest that day. So sometimes that boundary means, so I can't come to the brunch, or I'm not gonna make it to the party, and I may not have anything else to do but be at my house. But maybe that's what I need to have that mental space, right?
Is that boundary getting clearer for you, or is it like a blurry boundary where you don't know when it's time for you to be off camera versus on stage?
It's very clear. But unfortunately for me, I learned how to be clearer about it after my health getting to a really bad place. Because I wasn't saying no, and because I wasn't drawing that boundary, my health got to this really bad place where I had to shut everything down just to get better. So after experiencing that, I learned the hard way. Hey, you need to start drawing those boundaries earlier. Don't wait.
Before it gets worse.
Don't wait until you get that sick. Don't wait until you have to go in the hospital. Don't wait until that time. Like, start drawing those boundaries now. Be more preventive than sort of reactionary on the back end. So that's super clear for me now, but it wasn't always.
Yeah, because you think you can always push your body and push your limits too.
Yeah, and because you put yourself last on your priority list. I know I do.
So a lot of people have defined self-care as these like physical activities they have to do. But as we spoke yesterday, you kind of mentioned it or redefined it as a term of soul care. Can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I just have noticed a lot of my friends are not using the term self-care as much. And particularly, I would say, among my friends who are women of color, I'm hearing more the term soul care, which in the context of how we're using it in conversation sounds like just this holistic care of yourself as a woman, as a person, as a human being. What does that look like? And, sometimes that looks like, if you're in a relationship, that looks like you having intentional time, with your person or your partner or your spouse, Sometimes it looks like one of my friends, she goes on silent retreats and she has some time of just like being away, being very quiet, like quieting, her mind and her soul. So I think the term soul care sort of pushes us to think beyond even just our physical body. It really is forcing us to think of ourselves on a whole, in our body, in our soul, in our spirit, in our emotional space. What are the things we need to take care of ourselves in that? Whatever term we use, to me, the term is not the most important part. I love the term soul care, but I think the term's not the most important part. It's that you remember, whether you're saying self-care or soul care or whatever, that it means you're taking care of your whole self, all of you. You're not segmenting out these certain parts. You're a whole being of everything, your feelings, thoughts, emotions, your body, your limbs, your everything.
Yeah, I like that term. I want to talk about owning your stories as a storyteller. Majority of your work is profoundly based on, your personal experiences, the relationships that surrounds you. How do you differentiate between the stories that define you versus those that don't? Or are all the stories components of who you are?
I feel like I have so much to say about this. I was at an event recently and I was talking with a woman, and she had lost her husband due to an act of violence. And she asked me, how do I navigate this now? Because the way that her husband lost his life became very public. And so that meant now she was being called upon in all these places to continue sharing this story. And she was having a hard time sort of navigating that, like almost like becoming well known for something really tragic that's happened to you. And I said something to her that I also am trying to do myself, and that I think is important for people, particularly in our generation of us who are like adults now, very social media connected, right? That I think there's a good aspect to the places where your story should define you, like the way that the people you come from, you know, the experiences you've had in your life, they make you who you are. So you shouldn't feel like you have to separate yourself from that or make yourself a new person that's not connected to those things, right? But I also wanted to tell her, you don't have to build a platform or a career on your struggle or on your place of pain, and that you don't owe anybody to open up those things for them. You don't owe anybody to have to sort of bleed for them emotionally in a way. And I think sometimes because we do have a culture of overshare in a lot of ways, and we have seen people become famous people from building a platform or business or organization based upon this aspect of their story. And I don't think we have to do that. I think if you have something really hard that happens to you and that becomes this catalyst for you being like, hey, I had this hard thing happen to me, I want to, you know, create more light in the world because of that. I want people who've gone through this thing I've been through to have hope in their life. That's a good thing. But that also doesn't mean you have to open that up for people every time, and that you are a person who is bigger than the thing that happened. So I think it's good to use our stories in a way that's helpful to people and let our stories define us in the good ways that they can, but to remember that we are not just our stories, that we are this like
in the grand scheme of things, that's one segment of us.
Yeah.
For those who are starting their own passion projects, do you have any career advice for them?
I think my biggest advice would be start small. I think sometimes when you have a passion in your mind or in your heart, the first thing that comes to you is huge. You know, you're like, I'm going to, like, I'll give you a great example. My podcast, which is called Her with Amena Brown, I have like 10,000 ideas of like what I want to do with it, you know? So when the idea first came to me, I'm like, I'm going to interview women. I want to have a conference. I want to have all this merchandise. Also, I need to be able to do these things. Like I just started getting like really out there. And not that it's bad to have big ideas, you should. But sometimes when we have a project we're passionate about, our big idea gets so big that we get overwhelmed and we either don't do anything because we just can't get our brain past, you know, here's my big idea, or we do something, but then we can't execute it well because we haven't really thought about what does that mean for me to do it this way. So I'm learning, like, start small. If it's a project you're passionate about that isn't time sensitive in the sense like you need this to be out, you know, right now because it's relevant, you know, about this thing that's happening, you know, if it's something that you could see yourself doing for 5 years or 10 years or more, then take your time and build it. You know, everything you do with it is this building block. So like with my podcast, I'm like, let me start by gathering together the guests that I want, you know, and I'm also in season 2 now, my podcast. What are the stories I want to be told here? And then like, I have a next like building block that will go after that. Do I think all those big things I'm going to eventually do? Absolutely. But I would say if you have a passion project, what's a good step 1 that you can start with? And start with that. And you'll get your step 1 done. And then you'll go, okay, what's my step 2? I'm the kind of brain that's like, I have 33 steps and I must do them in 3 days time, you know? And it's like people that have dreams and ideas, like it takes them years sometimes to build. So give yourself that grace and that time to build what you want. That's the plus of being, you know, a girl boss. You're building what you want. No one gets to tell you how and when. You get to decide how you want to.
Yeah, that's something I've definitely learned with the missed appointment. Learning to not rush things and allowing it to just unfold as it's going. And I just want to tie that into self-care, because that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned too with the misappointment, is that like I have to be honest with my capabilities and also what time will allow me to do. And that's helped a lot. Yeah. Okay, well, that wraps up our last episode of The Misappointment, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
If you guys want to check out Amena Brown's stuff, we'll link everything down below, and she has written 2 books and has published albums of her poetry and also hosts a podcast.
Wow, I sound really busy. But I do have 2 books. My first book is called Breaking All Rhythms, and my second book, which is just a year old, is How to Fix a Broken Record. And those books are available wherever books are sold, wherever you like to get your books. And How to Fix a Broken Record also has a podcast that's available wherever you like to get your podcasts. And my current podcast that is ongoing is Her with Amena Brown, where I interview women, and in particular women of color, on a theme or topic. So for season 1, our theme was body, and for season 2, our theme was lost and found. And I'd never talk about them, but I do have 5 spoken word albums on iTunes if you're interested in listening to them.
Yeah. Check them out. She's amazing, guys.
My missed appointment is the dentist. I need to go to the dentist really bad.